Welcome to Observations, an open conversation about women's health. This is a space where physicians, patients, and other experts can sit down and have honest, evidence-based dialogue that cuts through the media bias and brings clarity back to maternal care and how we can care for both patients, mother and preborn child. With each episode, we will have real stories, real science, but also real questions about women's health today. From clinical insights to lived experiences, to aligned perspectives, and yes, also respectful disagreements. This is our goal, to bridge the gap between physician and patient, to empower informed decision-making, and bring back and elevate compassionate, fact-driven care. Now, a quick note before we dive in. Not every guest on the podcast is going to represent the views or positions of Applog, but we believe that having open and honest conversations are going to make us better. So, grab your coffee, settle in, and let's get into today's observation.
I'm your host today, Dr. Susan Bane. Today, we're excited to have an incredible partner with us, Brandy Meeks, President and CEO of Vitae Foundation. We also are so grateful they were one of our sponsors for our national conference, MBEC 2026. Brandy has been a leader in the pro-life movement for well over a decade, with a background that spans pregnancy center leadership, national advocacy, and research-driven messaging. She began her work on the front lines as a pregnancy center director, where her passion for serving women and families really took shape. She later joined Vitae Foundation, helping translate research into practical communication strategies that reach people in critical moments. You may also recognize her work alongside Abby Johnson at And Then There Were None during the rise of the unplanned movement, where she helped abortion workers leave the industry. Since 2022, Brandy has led Vitae Foundation as president, advancing its mission to equip others with messages rooted in decades of research, so that together we can reach people more effectively when it matters most, as they're making a decision of massive consequence in their life. Brandy, we're so glad you're here to talk to us today about a subject that's not preached enough: men and their role in abortion. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited for the opportunity to be able to talk this through and for us to be able to maybe think about it a little bit differently than what we have before in the past.
Yeah. So for those that don't know about Vitae Foundation, tell us more about its critical role in the pro-life movement.
Sure. So we've been doing research and messaging for about past 30 plus years. I think we're on year 34. And in the very beginning, we were running some messages, and they seemed to work when we're looking at people that are like-minded, people that have a pro-life upbringing. They seem to be pretty straightforward, focusing on the baby, right? Like, who doesn't want to see the humanity and a little bundle of joy that's pure innocence. And we went to a trusted friend, and he is really big into marketing and messaging. His name is Peter Hershend, and he is the founder of something called Silver Dollar City or Dollywood. Perhaps you've heard of one of those places. And he said, you know what, guys, this is okay, but it's not good enough. It's not going to reach people to pull them off the fence. It's more like groupthink, and you can do better. And he said, I'm going to connect you with Dr. Charles Kinney. He's a leading consumer psychologist. He's worked with Fortune 500 companies like Jeep and McDonald's and Coca-Cola. In fact, he is the guy that's responsible for the value menu that we use in fast food today. Now, you might say, Brandy, don't be talking about fast food. We don't love fast food. is that our lives have been shaped by this man's research. And it's different than surveys or polling. That's great. And that's typically what you think of when you think of research. But this is a one-of-a-kind specialized research called emotional research or right brain research. And that is what we do exclusively here at Vitae Foundation, so that we can better understand the emotional motivators behind decision-making, specifically with the abortion issue, because then we can use that research to create messaging strategies so that we can truly build a culture of life together by changing hearts and minds.
Thank you for that background and especially the context with how you got started with Vitae Foundation, doing the research and recognizing. I love the challenge you got. You can do better, and you did.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about one of those research studies that you all did. So you recently have been looking at men and their role in women choosing life. In your most recent study on communicating with men, what were you trying to understand and the gap that you saw that led to this important work?
Well, it really began with the fact, again, in the beginning, the pro life movement was really focusing on the baby. You saw these really sweet pictures of these little ones, and that was what a lot of the messaging was around. And then you saw us shift. A couple decades ago, probably 15 ish years, 15 plus, we started focusing on the mom, on the woman. And you saw that messaging start to resonate more with her. She felt like you were talking to her about her. And when you said choose life, in that moment, she's thinking, whose life? This child I'm carrying, or the life that I thought I was going to have, my life plan, my career, my school, all of that. Right. And so we shifted to focus on her. But along the way, when we were doing these research projects on her, specifically one on abortion healing, what we discovered is she shared that when her partner would respond, I'll support you no matter what you choose, which you might have even heard those words before they completely tumbled out of my mouth because they have been conditioned in our minds by our society to think that that's the compassionate thing to say if you know someone who's experiencing an abortion. But unfortunately, these women, even pro-abortion women in this abortion healing study, these were women who'd had abortions. They said, I resented when he said that to me. And the reason being is because she expressed that she felt like all the responsibility was taken and shoved back on her shoulders with that response from her partner. And again, that's problematic. And what we know now is that this is, we have findings that come out of our research, but we also have what I call light bulb moments. It's these moments where things are illuminated that it's like, whoa, I can't believe I never saw that before. And one of these that came out of that is that women are not telling their partners that they are pregnant unless they want affirmation from him and want to at least carry this pregnancy. Maybe not parent, maybe it looks like adoption, but she's not looking for abortion because if she wanted an abortion, Dr. Bain, she go get that on her own. She doesn't need a man to have an abortion, not even for the financial piece of it anymore. We know we have abortion, the abortion industry will ship them across state lines to if they need a surgical abortion. And we also know how readily available the abortion pill is as well. It's quite the epidemic. But point being, we discovered that we did have a gap because we have men who have been conditioned to think that the right thing to say is, I'll support you no matter what you choose. And so we set out to understand a little bit more about how that happened and then how we can overcome that messaging and understand what fears, what is motivating them emotionally with that response. And then also sometimes to coerce or persuade her into having an abortion. And so we sat down with men in Denver, in Dallas, in Orlando, Phoenix, and St. Louis for these case studies so that we could better understand what it is they were facing in their now moment. Just like when women are actively considering abortion, we needed to understand how men were feeling in that moment as well.
Yeah, I mean, everything you're saying is so consistent with my medical practice. So I'm an OBGYN who's practiced for almost 29 years now. And my practice was what you think of it as an OBGYN, helping women deliver a baby, doing surgeries, physicals, and all that. But it's now shifted where all of my patients are coming to pregnancy centers. They have unplanned pregnancies. And time again, I hear them, the men who come. And of course, one of the things we could talk about is the fact that sometimes the men aren't there.
Mhm.
But when they are there and you ask them their thoughts, it's often, I'll support her whichever way she decides. And I will often then challenge them. Um, and say to the woman in front of him, would you like to have an honest conversation with him and really hear his thoughts? And I've never had a woman say no.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and so tell us a little bit more when you talk about the father of the baby as a key influencer in her decision making. Um, help us understand what that influence looks like in real life. I've got it from my clinician perspective, but from what you all found in your study.
Sure. So again, I think we underestimate the value that men bring to this equation. And quite sincerely, I think that they've had a target on their backs for a very long time. The abortion industry has has made it very clear that they don't want men involved in this. They have shouted them down with my body, my choice. They basically strip men of their masculinity in many areas, but with the feminist movement, but especially with this, right? Telling them that they don't have a say. And in fact, that was another one of our findings is that men feel like the ultimate decision belongs to the woman. It rests with the woman. And you might say, well, that's not surprising. That's part of the issue. That's part of the problem. It's not shocking to us, right? That men feel this way. And so that's part of what we have to overcome. Just because it's reality does not mean that it's morally correct. So, men are the most influential person in a woman's life when she's considering abortion. So much so that you mentioned earlier that I used to work for Abby Johnson, and I mention this often, but I think that it's important. Former abortion workers will they'll attest to the fact that they did everything they could to try to keep men from coming to that appointment, from coming back with the woman, from even being present in any way. They would encourage them when they made the phone calls to schedule the appointment. You can come by yourself. You don't need to tell anybody, right? Like secrecy. And even in our
Mhm.
past studies, that has been shown that that was one of the brand strengths that Planned Parenthood tried to push out is the whole secrecy and anonymity piece. Well, it's because they don't want him to be a part of it. And even so much as they would turn when he would sit in the waiting room and they would take her back. Well, they can't take him back initially because they definitely don't want her to see the ultrasound and they don't want him to see the ultrasound sitting over in a corner. And so if they are performing an ultrasound and they come back and get him for another part of the appointment, they turn the heat up in the waiting room so that they basically made it where it was impossible for this man to be comfortable in there. And oftentimes he leaves. And when they come back to call him for the appointment, he's not in there. And they will go back and deliver a message to this woman to tell her, I'm sorry, we can't find him. We don't know where he is. Can you imagine how isolated women feel in that moment?
Yeah.
Heartbroken,
Yeah.
right? And that they're doing this and they have done this because they understand how influential he is. Now, we've already covered the fact that he thinks he's supposed to say, I'll support you no matter what you choose. Well, in our study, then the men started pushing back with the question, well, then what should I have said? What can I do? Because their words, not mine, they said there were two men that actually responded with the same phrase. Well, damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Hmm. Yeah.
They
Absolutely.
feel like they're backed into a corner. But here's the thing. Again, women have expressed that's not what they want to hear. They also expressed they want to hear something as high level as, I'm not sure what this looks like, but I'll help you be the best mom possible and I'll be the best dad possible and we'll figure this out together. And so that is as simple as it needs to be. It doesn't mean you have to figure out everything in that moment, but it just means she's not alone. Because if you are wishy washy on this issue now, you might be wishy washy to her in 2 years from now, or when you're up all night with a baby, or disappear when a child's going into kindergarten. No woman wants that as her future. No woman wants that as her reality. So we need men to be men. We need you to stand up. I often say that men and women are meant to be complementary. We were never meant to be in competition. And I'm sure you understand this as well. Like men are naturally wired as nurturers, as protectors and as providers. And I'll cover that more in our study in just a minute. Women are naturally wired as nurturers. Now, it does not mean we cannot lead. You and I both understand that. strong women here, and we can lead. It just means we lead differently. And we need men to protect us. And we certainly need them to protect our children. One of the findings that came out of the study is that men obviously do have this innate desire to provide and protect. But their hangup is they are fearful financially how they will provide. And so that is another thing that we should cover and talk about ways when we're talking about how to equip young men. We need
Mhm.
to connect them with financial resources, and I don't mean just the people that will help them monetarily. I mean budgeting, helping them understand how to provide for their family, educational resources, a holistic approach.
Yeah, so let's do this. Let's talk a little bit specifically about the methods of the study because I know you had men categorized in different ways. And then don't want to miss the practical implications of what you found. So, talk to us a little bit. You've told us that you had men across several cities, and tell us a little bit more about the methodology.
Okay, so I will set this up by helping people understand again, right brain research is different. So your sample size is going to look differently as well. So whereas, generally you're trying to get hundreds of respondents for surveys and polling, in our situation we had 50 men. And you might say, "Well, Brandy, how can you possibly come to any conclusions with 50?" But think about them as 50 individual case studies. So you're sitting down with these men and we did segment them. We wanted to know men that part of abortions. We wanted to know men that had both advocated for the life of their child, those who had chosen abortion, and also men that had not been a part of abortions, but just had a knowledge about how it was being impacted and influenced in the culture. Okay, so you had these three groups of men, and then we sat down with them, and the way that the research actually unfolds is that they have no idea that we're a pro-life organization. We have contractors that come in that actually do the interviews, and additionally we work with research sites all over the country that do consumer research. So things that, you might see someone down the hallway that's doing a research project with Bic razors to understand price points and colors and different types of emotional attachment to their disposable razor. And so again, it's drawing from that group as well, so they don't know that what exactly we're trying to develop from this study. But when you sit down with those men, it's important to get them to relax. We wanna make sure the information they're giving us is valid, so we'll ask questions to them in different ways. But we use a technique to be able to access the right brain research in a way that allows them to get their guard down. And I know that this has been effective because I've seen it happen. We watch behind this glass where they can't see us. Um, but I have seen people when they fill out their initial survey say things like, "Yeah, I was a part of one abortion." And then they get in the room and we find out they were actually part of four. And you might say, "Oh, are they lying?" Well, sometimes socially acceptable things are, "I was a part of one abortion," right? And when you get them to relax and you get them to truly let their guard down and they're being honest and they're not filtered, then you find out the real truth about the emotions that they were navigating in those moments. And they do oftentimes share a lot more than they're willing to share on paper, and they're able to get honest.
I mean, I often, when I talk to women who have an unplanned pregnancy and I'm trying to help them understand decision making when we're in that fight or flight response, where I call it offline. It comes from the trauma literature. When you help people understand when they've had past traumas in their life, what offline when we're fight or flight versus online, where we're in that relaxed parasympathetic system, is actually we feel safe.
Yes.
And we're not in the I've got to fight, I've got to flight, or I'm freezing. And we know from studies that the blood flow from the brain moves from the thinking part of the brain to the emotional part of the brain, and the limbic system, which is the emotional part. And we can't think straight. We've all heard the phrase deer in the headlights. And so that's the last place you want to be making decisions of such consequence, like do I give birth and parent? Do I give birth and choose adoption? Or do I give permission for someone, including myself, to end the life of my baby? And so your protocol where you're trying to help people get the men get into this space so that they can really think through and give honest answers. Brandy, before we get into like the results and the practical implications, I do want to twist a little because I can hear critics saying, "Why didn't you go through the do this study with the peer reviewed process? Why are you doing it from more of a consumer approach?" And um, while we know in social sciences this approach is used often, case studies and small focus groups and things like that, what what's the thinking, or how do you respond to critics who say, "Why didn't you do this and share it through peer reviewed versus more kind of this approach?"
I appreciate the question because it is one that we get oftentimes from professional circles, and you guys are you understand because you have like all of your education, right, revolved around peer reviewed articles, peer reviewed research, but consumer research is different, right? And so I think that that's what we have to keep in mind. And this is consumer research. It is this blend of different types of research, which make it unique. And so it doesn't have the same kind of capabilities for peer review that you would have if you were, if you had a larger sample size, if you're looking at other factors that typically, don't reflect what we do through emotional research. So it can be a hang up for some people. Another thing that can be a hang up for them as well is that the longevity of our studies. Typically, when you see a research project and it's more than 4 or 5 years old, you're like, I don't really know if that information's valid anymore. But we still cite research from the 90s for us because our research, from what we understand, and Dr. Charles Kinney being the founder of this, is timeless. And you might say that doesn't make any sense. But again, emotions don't change. Fear is fear, right? The things that people are experiencing, now they might develop differently because of technology that's changed or situational things, but at the basics don't change. The way that we are responding emotionally to things, those don't change, and so that does make our research different. It does make it a little bit riskier to share because some people will not understand. But if you take the time to look into consumer research and how different it is than most educational research that you see cited in sources, you'll be able to see it from a different lens because again, ours is not about proving facts. Ours is about most effective messages that connect with people's hearts and minds on the issue. So it's just a paradigm shift, but I appreciate the opportunity to discuss it because it's oftentimes why it's dismissed. And I think that's unfortunate.
Yeah, it doesn't mean it's different, not less.
That's right.
Um, but it does have, each of them have their own limitations, and your conclusions, as long as we know what our limitations are when we draw our conclusions, and your purposing is for messaging and to help what you find, how can we translate that into the conversations that are most helpful for women who I believe really want to make a life affirming decision. If you look at some of the peer reviewed studies that have come out, one from the Charlotte Leisure Institute showed that 60% of women would who have had an abortion would have preferred to have given birth if they had that emotional support, that financial stability. And so when you learn that and can translate that, um, it really, I think, complements it. So, Brandy, I want to read the conclusion of your study, and then I want you to talk about it for our audience, okay? So it says that when a man finds himself in an unexpected pregnancy situation, he most commonly experiences three distinct emotions, and sometimes it's a mix or all three: fear, shock, and excitement slash happiness. The unexpected pregnancy often spurs a vital conversation between a man and a woman and provides the opportunity for the man to prepare, grow up, and become more responsible. Most men talk about their or their partner's initial lack of readiness, when finding out about an unexpected pregnancy. Reasons for not being ready to have a baby include financial insecurity, life stage, so school, early in career, young age, immaturity, selfishness, or inability to provide a good environment for the child. Wow, that's a mouthful, right? So let's break it down into a couple segments. I want you to first respond of the sentence, and you've kind of touched on it, but the fear, shock, and mix of excitement and happiness. How did your research tell me about how you
Yeah.
found that?
Well, again, some of it's encouraging, right? The excitement piece, the fact that men are connected to this life that is growing within their partner. And they do recognize that it's half their DNA. Then they go on to unfortunately surrender those rights through passivity and through this idea of like, well, culture says, and so that's the end result, unfortunately. We can fix that. Like we need to. Again, it shouldn't be a shock to us, but we have a responsibility to step in with messaging and to help young men understand, no, she wants you. She wants you to lead. She wants you to shelter her. She wants not just her, this child as well. But the financial piece, again, it's when you think about it, it's not really surprising. Men are naturally wired as providers and protectors. And so when they feel like they might not be able to provide, then that causes them to possibly flee or pull back or not fully engage with the excitement that's in conflict with them in that moment. And so if we want further implication here is like if we want to be able to help engage him in that excitement and also to lead well, then we need to help him understand what kind of resources are available. And if we don't have resources available, we got to create the resources. I think that is why we have so many men's programs that are taken off all over the country. And I love they're in pregnancy centers, they're in churches. Let's find ways to equip these young men to feel like they can provide for their families.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I love that. I have the blessing of being able to go across the country and often speak for pregnancy centers at their fundraiser dinners. And I remember, I mean, I hear so many great stories, but particularly one in Indiana where their men's program, literally they have someone in the community who teaches them skills that they can bring into the family. Men or women could learn these skills, but it's things like how do you change the oil or the tire on your car, and the bank account you mentioned earlier. I mean, it's real world stuff. It's real things that the research has said over and over that are the barriers, and taking those barriers down are what pregnancy centers and partners in the community do so beautifully. Um, so, your next thing in your conclusion is this unexpected pregnancy often has to spur a vital conversation to provide an opportunity for the man to prepare, grow up, and become more responsible. When I read that conclusion, it brought me to a couple that I had really good rapport with, I was working with. And we were talking about their three options in front of them to parent, adoption, or abortion. And I turned to him and I said, well, what are your thoughts on this? And he said, I take care of my own. And I said, well, great. That means abortion's off the table. And he looked at me, he said, well, that's not my choice, it's hers. And I turned to her and I said, is that true? And I said, would you want the two of you to talk more about this? And she was like, she nodded. She didn't say anything. And so I gave him homework to go home and have this vital conversation, as you call it, and just be honest with each other. And they came back a week later, and they decided to parent because they had had this conversation, and he had the opportunity to do these things that you talk about in your conclusion. So, how do you respond to kind of that finding in your research?
Well, I love your approach. And I think that's exactly what more providers need to be doing. I think we need to, again, open up conversations. Let's connect. We were wired to be able to connect with each other, right? And so many times we think, well, I don't have a say on this issue. Well, men absolutely do. and we have to empower them, and we have to give them opportunities. And what you did, you just laid it out so beautifully. And there was another finding that came out of this study that really kind of set up that conclusion when we talk about responsibility. Men bring up the word responsibility in the study because part of what we do is we take the common words that are used, the common themes that are expressed. That's how we come up with the findings. So we start to weave that all together. We actually count how many times words are said. We start to look into that. And responsibility was one they were talking about consistently. They used the words. They're talking about how they weren't ready for responsibility, or how that needed to be responsible or needed to get ready. They they understand the power of that word. They take it very seriously. And so we need to create messaging and conversations around that to help them feel powerful with that word in a good way, and of, you know what, this is what I need to do. I need to step into this role. Something else that came out of it that lends to that, and it was something that Benjamin Watson, he's a former NFL player that was also on our men's advisory committee. He shared just how excited he was when he read the research to understand that men are, even some of these men that haven't had good role models, they're not unsalvageable. They when they expressed how they felt during this research, they were sharing that they want to be better dads than what their dads were. They want to honor that responsibility. If they had good dads, they still wanted to be better dads. If they had what they considered not good dads, bad dads, they still wanted to be better dads than what they had before. That is incredible. That just means, again, when we talk about further evolutions, we need great mentors.
Mhm.
Mentors to stand in the gap for those that don't have great examples of fathers. And that is where, again, we need to connect as human beings and see how we can serve our communities well. And also, if we don't have those resources available, as you as providers to be able to hand to someone, well, then let's inspire people to create those programs because it's a need.
Yeah, absolutely. In the health psychology literature, there are a lot of theories of health behavior change. And one of them is a theory related to readiness to change, the trans theoretical model for health behavior change. And it really looks at health behavior change as not this instantaneous moment, but actually it's this gradual cyclical process of change. And when you think about often an abortion decision, and especially as at the beginning of this, you talked about how abortion clinics, it's secretive, it's fast, it's quick, do it and get on with your life. The beauty of, I think, good pregnancy center work is we recognize that in that moment, you can't make that decision immediately. There is this gradual change. And it's actually not smart to make that decision when you're in this fight or flight. I give the example, I'm a breast cancer survivor. I'm doing great. But the day I was told I had breast cancer, I would have gone and gotten a double mastectomy because I went fight or flight. And I was like, okay, I'm just getting rid of this problem.
Mhm.
But I took 2 to 3 weeks to get doctor's appointments and hear about all my choices, and I ended up not going that route, and I would have regretted it had I. And there's so many parallels to what I went through to what a positive pregnancy test and choosing an abortion without that chance to develop some readiness for change. So when we think of helping men take that moment as that pivotal moment to I need to be ready for this and be more responsible and break that, perhaps that legacy in their family where they had a father figure that wasn't the type of positive masculinity that we are hoping for men to have. Talk to us a little bit more about, like, the reasons for not being ready and very practical ways. What are you calling out? First of all, the pregnancy centers to do, but also call out the medical professionals. As you think about what a lot of our audience is going to be medical professionals, what can we do better to help? men in that situation?
Well, I will say that again, I think that there's a lack of education. They don't understand, in many cases, the difference between the abortion pill, the morning after pill. They don't understand any of this. And so sometimes they're making judgments. And again, they're surrendering all of that to the woman because they're like, I don't understand it. So I do think there is a responsibility on our shoulders to make sure that they do understand it. I know that it's ultimately the woman's choice, but if men knew the power and influence that they had, and I don't mean power in a negative, toxic masculinity way, I mean in a way of, again, like protection, like protecting the people that they love. If they understood more about it, I think that they would be able to lean in to with in a compassionate way to be able to talk about these things. Something else that we learned from the study is that men that were interviewed were absolutely connected to the heartbeat. They were connected at that moment. That's where they felt like it was too far to do anything else. And so for us, that gives us an opportunity to be able to educate them not just about when a heart begins, but going back to conception again, getting back to the basics here and helping them understand that the blueprint for that heart that they're so connected to begins at the moment of conception when that DNA is formed and that is when the building blocks begin. And so life begins at conception. If we can they're so, I mean, they are very emotionally attached to that heartbeat. So if we could walk them back to understand when the heartbeat actually is is planned out, I think that we have this amazing opportunity for education in this space to then help young men understand life begins at conception. And I want to protect it from that moment, not just when a heartbeat begins.
Yeah, I think that aligns beautifully with I always tell the women that my role is not to make your decision as an OBGYN doctor taking care of both of you. I hope you can make a life affirming decision because that means both my patients get health care. But I say our role here at the Pregnancy Center is to empower you with information and provide you exceptional health care. And your last comment makes me really think that have we miss the opportunity to empower men with information too. And I think you're when you look at the practicality of what we, especially as healthcare professionals, can do, is making sure we're including them in the equation of empowering them with information. Because I do think when that couple, whether they are don't know each other well, whether they've been married a long time, they're engaged, they're boyfriend and girlfriend. I mean, you get all kinds of relationships. The key is that vital communication and education is a big part of that. So, Brandy, as we wrap up, education is also a huge part of MBEC, our national conference. I want to thank you again for being a sponsor. And tell us what'd you think of the conference?
We were honored to get to be a part of the conference. Our team came back energized, ready to employ new strategies. But I think one of the things that we really carry with us is that as we have designed this influencing the influencer program, when it comes to providing care, you guys are the go-to people for that. When it comes to advice, you've already built relationships with people. That's why we were involved in the conference is because we recognize that you already have that conduit system established. You're building relationships with people. So if we can come and connect with you, then we have a broader reach because you are developing the relationships and we're not just going to the general public and trying to do an education campaign. You guys are the ones carrying this message forward for us. But another thing that we loved about the conference is the community. Again, the community of people that are willing to have the tough conversations. And we cannot thank you enough because we know that this is a hard one. This is not easy. And you are specifically called to be a part of it if you're a part of this community. So we're just honored to get to work alongside you and be able to help engage in those difficult conversations.
Well, thank you, Brandy. We're proud at Applog to be the medical voice of the pro life movement, but we can't do it without partners such as you and Vitae Foundation. So thank you for being at MBEC, sponsoring MBEC, and for sharing your expertise today on our podcast.
Honored to do it. And please reach out to us, vitaefoundation.org, if you have any questions. And if you want more information about the men's study, you can go to afewgoodmenstudy.org and you can find all of the findings. We also have a little promo video on there just to help establish the need for the study. I think you'll find it engaging. You'll also see some names you might know, like Dr. David Reardon is on there, and some of the other people I mentioned, Jarrell Godsey with Heartbeat International. You'll see some familiar faces for sure that were a part of this men's study, and we're really honored to be able to work with them.
Thank you, Brandy.
We hope that you enjoyed today's episode of Observations and that it broadened your perspective on women's health and how we can care for both patients, mother, and preborn child. If you like this episode, make sure to give us a 5-star review where you can find your podcasts. Make sure that you like this on YouTube and subscribe to our channel for more episodes coming up. And if you have any suggestions on any topics that we should cover or guests that we should have on, make sure that you email us at media@applog.org. Again, thank you for joining us for today's observation, and we'll see you in our next episode.